the Dead Sea Scrolls. What secrets do these ancient writings hold? And how did this Bedouin shepherd stumble across them? It was the year 1947, and a Bedouin shepherd by the name of Muhammad, tending his flock near the ancient city of Jericho in the West Bank, let his goat fall into one of the caves that dot the cliffs along the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. As he went to retrieve the animal, he noticed some broken pottery in what looked like a leather jar. The jars were sealed with wax, inscribed with biblical passages, and buried inside the cave floor. Inside, he found papyrus scrolls that were surprisingly well preserved. He took them back to his village and sold them to an antique dealer who had no idea what he had. But in reality, those scrolls came from the same place where archaeologists would later find the remains of a settlement inhabited by a group known as the Essenes. In the area of Qumran, which lies just north of the Dead Sea, archaeologists have uncovered 11 caves filled with thousands of ancient manuscripts. The scrolls date from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. This makes them around 2,000 years old. They are written in Hebrew, but also include Aramaic and Greek texts, and many of them contain parts of books that are included in our Old Testament today. We can even find parts of the books of Enoch and Jubilees, which are not considered canonical by most Christian churches today, but which might shed light on the kind of books that early Christians read before the canon was settled. The scrolls also include parts of the books of Genesis, Isaiah, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Psalms, Job, as well as books of the Maccabees. And while we're at it, there's also evidence that shows that some of the earliest followers of Jesus, it's like the author of the Gospel of Mark, copied some of their sources from earlier sectarian manuscripts that they found in caves like these. But who was the sect that hid them? Some scholars think it was the Essenes. Why did they hide the scrolls? One reason could be to preserve them. During the Second Temple period, a time that lasted from around the 6th century BCE until the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, there was a fear that the scriptures would become corrupted or destroyed. This was partly due to the recent history of the Jewish people. See, during the Babylonian exile, when the Babylonians invaded Judah and destroyed the temple in 586 BCE, they also burned up its books. So once they experienced firsthand how fragile their religious heritage was, it made sense for them to want to protect it. Another reason could be because of persecution. Most historians agree that the sect responsible for writing the Dead Sea Scrolls were members of a Jewish sect called the Essenes. Now, we don't know too much about them because they didn't leave behind any extra biblical writings, but we do learn about them through the writings of outsiders. Both the historian Josephus Flavius and the writer Philo of Alexandria wrote about them. They probably separated themselves from mainstream society and lived in small communities. They were known for their commitment to peace, so much so that they refused to participate in the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucids, choosing instead to live separate from the world. It's possible that after the Romans came into power, they began to persecute the Essenes, causing them to flee and hide their holy books. What is the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls for us today? Without the Dead Sea Scrolls, our oldest complete manuscript of the Old Testament would be the Leningrad Codex, which dates from around the year 1000 CE. That means we would have no complete manuscripts from the first 900 years of Jewish history. Luckily, thanks to those caves, we do. And since the Dead Sea Scrolls are so much older than the manuscripts that we used to use, they have helped scholars learn more about how the Old Testament was transmitted throughout the centuries. For example, compared to later versions of the Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls show that certain words and phrases were added over time. For example, in Isaiah 7:14, in the majority text we read, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and will call his name Emmanuel." The word immaculate is a Latin word that means undefiled. And it was inserted here by someone translating the text into Latin. It's interesting because it became a key verse used to argue for the virgin birth of Jesus. And yet the original Hebrew here doesn't say anything about the virgin birth, the Dead Sea. Scrolls also help us better understand the transmission of the text. What's interesting is that when we compare the Dead Sea Scrolls with the Masoretic text, we find a lot of textual variance. Many of them are quite minor, but some of them are actually pretty major. There are even differences in the spelling of names and words. For example, in the Book of Psalms, we find the name Yahweh, the personal name of God, spelled differently. Sometimes it's spelled Yud-Hey Vav-Hey, and sometimes it's spelled Yud-Hey Yud-Hey. So this tells us that maybe the Masoretic text isn't as reliable as some people might think. The Masoretic text is the version of the Old Testament that most Christians use today. It was finalized around the year 900 CE by Jewish copyists called the Masoretes. So if there are significant differences between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text, then that raises questions about the accuracy of the Masoretic text. Now, while the Dead Sea Scrolls are very helpful for us today, there's a big problem. A lot of them are missing. We know that because the caves were only discovered by accident. There are probably more caves out there that we haven't discovered yet, and that's great news because imagine what other artifacts we might find. However, the caves that we have found are only half full. The rest of the manuscripts are in museums and private collections. So why aren't they all together in one place? Well, when the Bedouin shepherds found the first few jars, they sold them to antique dealers, who then sold them to collectors and museums. Eventually, the authorities got involved and started to crack down on this, but it was too late. Many of the most important scrolls were already sold to museums and private collectors in Europe and America. For example, one of the most important fragments comes from the book of Isaiah. It's called Isaiah 52:13. It was found in Cave 1 in 1947. But in 1965, it was purchased by the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., but it wasn't until 2020 that they announced that they had acquired the fragment. They didn't announce it earlier because they knew that it would cause a lot of controversy. After all, the museum was founded by Steve Wynn, founder of the ultra-conservative group Answers in Genesis, which claims that the Bible is literally true. So many people think that the museum is trying to cover up the fact that the Dead Sea Scrolls do seem to support the beliefs of young Earth's creationism. It's estimated that around 20% of the Dead Sea Scrolls have been lost forever. And while that's a tragedy, there is hope that maybe one day more caves will be found and more artifacts will come to light. How exactly did they discover the Dead Sea Scrolls? The first cave that was discovered was 1QM. There's a system that was created to keep track of the different caves. The letter Q stands for cave, the number stands for the location of the cave, and the letter that follows it indicates the archaeological season in which it was excavated. In total, 13 caves were discovered, but not all of them contained scrolls. Only 11 of the caves contained artifacts from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. The others either contained nothing or they contained artifacts from other time periods. Many of the Dead Sea Scrolls were written on papyrus, which is made from the papyrus plant that grows along the Nile River in Egypt. It was often imported from Egypt for use in Judea. Papyrus was popular for writing on because it was cheap and easy to work with. However, because of the hot and dry climate of the region, the papyrus tended to decay quickly. I think this is one reason why the scrolls were hidden away in the caves. They were probably looking for a place that was cool, dry, and dark. Caves were an obvious choice because they tend to be all three. Another reason is that the caves were probably used as a storage space for the settlement. Archaeologists have found other kinds of artifacts in the caves, such as lamps, tools, and pottery. It seems likely that the settlement used the caves to store things like food and other valuables when they left the community to go tend their fields. It's unclear whether the Essenes wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls or simply collected them. They may have written them, copied them from earlier manuscripts, or taken them with them when they fled from the Roman authorities. Maybe one day we'll know the answer to that question. But regardless of who wrote them, they have had an impact on the way that we read the Bible today. Many modern translations of the Bible are based on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here's a quick list of my favorites. The New International Version, known for being clear and easy to read. The New King James Version, which is a bit more poetic and beautiful. The English Standard Version, which is a bit more literal and word for word. We're in the New American Standard Bible, which is highly regarded for its accuracy. But regardless of which translation you use, I encourage you to take some time to sit down and read the Bible for yourself. Who knows? Maybe you'll find something that surprises you.